So once you've done some of the basic tabby weave, then you can move over to some of the textural applications. The first one that I want to show you is raya knots. It's a pretty simple, it's a looped knot that goes along the warp. With the raya knots, you're going to cut lengths of thread. You're going to cut them about twice as long as you want the raya knot to be. So for example, if I only want it to be like 3 inches long, I should have it about 6 inches or so. The lengths on these don't have to be perfect. We can always trim and modify them a bit later on, but I would say aim for about 2 times the length that you'd like. And then when you go to attach them, you're going to essentially pair up 2 of the warp threads. You're going to have the length for your raya knot loop over both, and then the ends are going to tuck around those warp strings to the inside so that they are in between the 2 pairs. Once you have that looped around, then you're going to gently pull those ends together, pull it tight. You want to have it tight enough that the raya knot's going to hold firm, but you don't want it so tight that it distorts the warp threads. Otherwise, these are pretty simple to do. You can do these either across the whole row. If you do have that, you're going to have one odd number. You'll just do 3 instead of 2. And then it's pretty much the same application. You're just going to have that warp thread in the middle that kind of just hangs around. Otherwise, you can also do these in smaller pairings as well. But these are a really nice way just to incorporate a little bit more texture. You can use these as a fringe that runs along the whole bottom of the piece. It can also be as a way to incorporate just different interest. And then second thing that I wanted to check in with on today is how to weave different shapes. So pretty much with shaping, it's going to be same weaving stitch that we've done before. You're going to start by leaving that 3-inch tail. You're going to do just that every other weave back and forth. You can use your heddle for that one side. And then instead of going all the way across, you are instead going to weave in the shapes. So you're going to stop at kind of different spots within your warp to create that shape. So right now I'm creating almost like a triangular shape, and then I'm going to have that build up as I get closer and closer to the height that I want. I'm going to move from going further along to the inside of the warp. I'm going to have that go closer to that right side. Otherwise, with shaping, this can vary quite a bit. This can be more geometric where you're just looking at kind of blocks within the piece. You can also look at like triangles, and then you can also look at kind of more organic shaping as well too. With the geometric shaping, you are going to start with kind of this basic format of putting in geometric shapes, and then when you get towards the end, you're going to start to round those shapes off. But with shaping, it's pretty simple. You're just looking at switching where you're ending off with that stitch and then bringing that through. As you wrap up that row and as you get your shape finalized, then what you're going to start to look at is how these join together. So we're going to use a method called interlocking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up where I left off on that very starting point of my warp. The thread is going to tuck underneath that next stitch, and then with the interlocking, essentially what it is it's the different wefts kind of looping together instead of meeting or having that gap in between those 2 warp threads. So I'm going to have that where I'm going to pull through, then I'm going to have it tuck in between where the kind of those 2 aligning sets of weft would be. And then I'm going to go back the other way. With interlocking, essentially the whole purpose of this is to ensure that your weaving is more seamless. If you just go to that closest warp thread but don't interlock, the piece is essentially going to have almost like a buttonhole in it where you're going to have essentially like little gaps or splits within the weaving, which sometimes can be used very intentionally, but sometimes especially when you're just looking at kind of basic shaping and starting to incorporate more color, usually is not a desired result that you want. So usually, unless you are going for that very intentional split, you're going to interlock those 2 colors together. With this, you're just going to kind of sew in between those 2 sets of weft, and then as I go, I usually just kind of keep pushing those down so that I can see where I'm interlocking, and it makes it a little bit easier for me as I go forward. One thing just to keep in mind as you start developing your interlocking, this does kind of provide an opportunity where sometimes it's going to be a little bit more easy to make a mistake. So just double check as you start to weave through that you're just double checking every few stitches that you are doing the opposite stitch from when you passed through. And then for anybody that's looking at kind of more organic shaping, essentially what you're going to do is, instead of kind of just doing that very geometric stair step, essentially what you're going to do is, once that stair step's done and you have the shape that you want, then you're going to go over with your yarn. This is going to create a more organic seam. It's going to create that more organic shape. You'll notice that there is a little bit of gapping there at those steps. That said, once you do get quite a bit of the yarn packed in, that is going to slowly disappear and is not going to be as noticeable. Otherwise, that's it. Next video, we'll look at Raya loops or bubble weave, and then the next one we'll look at is sumac. Holler if you have questions. Otherwise, you're good to go.